Good evening, and thank you all for coming. My name is Amy Shepard, and I'm the Editor-in-Chief of the National Security Law Journal here at George Mason University School of Law. On behalf of our journal, the Military Law Society, and on behalf of the Federalist Society, I welcome you to Drone Wars, Challenges and Solutions. Tonight's panel discussion is one of two symposia the journal is hosting in anticipation of the release of our next issue, which includes an article on the lawfulness of combat drones in the fight against terrorism. Volume 2, Issue 1, will be available in the coming weeks, but in the meantime, if you enjoy tonight's discussion, I invite you to join us next Tuesday for Blinking Red, a conversation with author Michael Allen on his new book with a panel discussion featuring General Michael Hayden and Mr. Chuck Alsup. For more information about our journal and how you can help to support the NSLJ, please consult the donor cards handed out at the registration table or visit our website at www.nslj.org.
Hi, I'm Josh Branson with the George Mason University Federalist Society chapter. Thank you all for being here today. We're delighted to see such a wonderful crowd. Thank you to our guests, and thank you especially to the National Security Law Journal. The Federalist Society believes that these types of debates are the best way to advance debate and discussion on difficult and important topics such as this one, and we are very fortunate to have such enthusiastic and hardworking partners as the National Security Law Journal here at George Mason to work with. It's their hard work and integrity that has allowed us to put this the event together, and I thank my team as well for helping put this together. With that, we hope that you enjoyed tonight, and if you're interested in any Federalist Society events, please stop by our table at the reception. We have a few coming up, and we'd love to share those with you. Thank you.
And at this time, I ask everyone to please turn off your cell phones and electronic devices. It is my great pleasure to introduce Major Ryan Sims, a pilot in the United States Air Force, who will give a short overview on how drones are operated. This portion of the event is off the record. The panel discussion will be on the record, but this portion is off the record. Major Sims.
Thank you, Ben. I want to welcome everyone again. I know some people came in during the presentation. I want to welcome you again to this event, Drone Wars, Challenges and Solutions. My name is Noah Oberlander. I'm the executive editor for the National Security Law Journal. And now I want to invite our panelists and our moderator to come up. We're going to be transitioning now to the on-the-record section of this event, if you will. What the discussion that the panel will be addressing is going to be focusing on is really looking to outline the challenges and the solutions of drone use in warfare under the law of armed conflict, because as you can see, there are new capabilities that both can strengthen and also weaken a case for legality of these weapon systems under international norms. So as our panel is getting ready, our panel is going to be moderated by Professor Jeremy Rabkin, who's a professor here at the George Mason School of Law. And before joining the faculty in 2007, he was a professor in the Department of Government at Cornell University for over 2 decades. He serves on the board of directors of the U.S. Institute of Peace. He was originally appointed by President Bush and was also reappointed by President Obama. He also serves on the board of academic advisors for the American Enterprise Institute and the board of directors for the Center for Individual Rights, a public interest firm based in Washington, D.C. And he also is one of our academic advisors for the National Security Law Journal here at George Mason University. So without further introduction, I'd like to welcome him here along with our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you. I happened to come across a book that was published in France in 1908 about the law of war. And the author, who was a professor at one of the French military academies, his first chapter was to understand the law of war, one must study war. And then he discussed the Franco-Prussian War. Most people today, 1908, think, oh, that was a long time ago. That could never happen again. It could happen again. We should pay attention. And we have to think about what we need to do if we are invaded again by Germans. And I thought, yeah. and there was some discussion about artillery. Artillery has made a lot of advances since 1870. This panel is very much in the spirit of that because all three of the panelists have gone right to the subject of drones and thought about how they are used and what the consequences are, and have not just spent time in law libraries. I think we'll go in this order. So we'll start with Scott Chain, who's a reporter in the Washington Bureau of the New York Times. Has written a number of things about drones and has really a wide perspective on a lot of strategic issues. He was the Baltimore Sun's correspondent in Moscow just at the very end of the Cold War, I guess just at the very end of the Soviet Union, and has written about how new technology undermined the Soviet Union. So that's a promising topic. And then we'll hear from Tara McKelvey, who is now a feature writer for BBC News and previously was a correspondent for Newsweek and the Daily Beast, and teaches now, or has taught at Georgetown's School of Foreign Service, and is herself a graduate of Georgetown University. Also has written a number of things on this subject, including an interview with Harold Koh, who turned very quickly once he became a member of the Bush administration. And finally, we'll hear from James Carafano, Dr. James Carafano, who's Vice President at the Heritage Foundation for Foreign and Defense Policy Studies. Long career in the military before that, graduate of West Point, and told me he wants to wrap up and hear what the other people are saying first. I'm going to leave this entirely to the panelists. I just want to put one point on the table first. We've seen a really dramatic increase in drone use in the Obama administration compared with the Bush administration, and I hope the panelists will, I mean, somebody recently counted up 6 times as many drone strikes in Pakistan in the last 4 years compared with the last 4 years of the Bush administration. I hope the panelists will discuss, is that a thing we should be happy about or disturbed about? Is it to Obama's credit or not to his credit? What does it tell us about the future? So, Mr. Shane, if you want to start.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks for having me as part of the panel tonight. Let me start with where Jeremy's leaving off there with Obama. Back in August of 2007, in his first big foreign policy speech, it was actually at the Wilson Center in D.C., Obama, kind of greenhorn presidential candidate, talked about how when he was president, if Musharraf, then the president of Pakistan, if we, the U.S., knew about a terrorist in Pakistan, hiding in Pakistan, a dangerous terrorist, obviously having in mind people like bin Laden, and Musharraf refused to act, we would act, he said. And he got a huge amount of flack about saying that from his rivals for the presidency, including Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, and Mitt Romney. They all, that day and the next day, took shots at him saying, here's this guy who knows nothing about foreign affairs. You can't go invade Pakistan, just because there's a terrorist there. It's an allied country. This shows how inexperienced he is. In fact, his aides say he was actually thinking of drones, but then they didn't even like to talk about drones publicly. But when he talked about taking action, he was already quite enamored with the idea of the drone, even though in 2007 they were used very sparsely. And so even though he ran against the big war in Iraq, and therefore some people were surprised that he embraced the drone so enthusiastically, in fact, I think his aides would tell you that that was sort of the plan all along. He often talked about, why don't we try to kill the people who are trying to kill us, as opposed to trying to kill all the other people that you end up killing when you have 100,000 troops in a foreign country for 10 years. So his embrace of drones was very much, part of his plan, part of his world picture. What had happened, Bush had sort of set the stage. Michael Hayden, as CIA director in 2008, had said Al-Qaeda had reconstituted in the tribal areas in Pakistan, and that he recommended a huge escalation of drone strikes. That started happening in the middle of 2008. So for the last 6 months of Bush, there were fairly regular drone strikes. Obama continued that when he took office, basically without a break. In Pakistan, he expanded targeted killing using drones and initially other weapons into Yemen at the end of 2009. In 2010, there was a huge peak of strikes in Pakistan. They've come down significantly since then. Strikes kept going up in Yemen for a while, but also have come down there, except for a flurry in August with a recent terrorism scare. But like any sort of technological fix, at first it can look like a panacea, and then you go to try it out, and it brings its own set of problems, which I'll just rattle off very quickly. The first, and the one that's got the most attention, is civilian casualties. Despite the precision, potential precision of the drone, if you get bad intelligence and you hit the wrong house, you still kill the wrong people. And even the precision of a Hellfire missile, it's still still a bomb that goes off. And even if they only wanted to kill they'd probably take out a number of people sitting around you, and that's happened in a lot of instances. And I think there's been a huge political reaction. It's seen as a violation of sovereignty. It's seen in a weird way as a sort of cowardly way to fight. And it's been a real kind of useful tool for demagogues in Pakistan. If you don't want the people to pay attention to the job you're doing running Pakistan, it's excellent to talk about the dire threat from drones and blame the U.S. But it has certainly created, contributed radicalization. Obama ran saying Guantanamo and torture had been recruiting tools for Al-Qaeda. There's no question but that the drones have become a recruiting tool for Al-Qaeda under Obama. And finally, just sort of on the horizon now, and Ryan talked about it briefly, is proliferation. We've pioneered the use of the armed drone. The only other country, to my knowledge, that has actually taken a strike with a drone is Israel. China came pretty close recently, and it's obviously only a matter of time before China and Russia, both of which have their own models now, use them. The Chinese may hit a Uyghur in Kazakhstan, say, or the Russians may try to kill a Chechen in Georgia. And the analogy with U.S. practice will be almost exact. It'll be interesting to see what they say the next day at the State Department press briefing about that. So that's something they're beginning to worry about now. And finally, I'll just say that this raises all kinds of legal questions, moral questions, practical questions. And we embarked on it, alas, in almost total secrecy. Even the congressional intelligence committees, which only exist to be told about these secret programs, had to fight to get a temporary look at the Justice Department legal opinion justifying, for example, the killing of Anwar al-Awlaki, the only American who's been deliberately targeted and killed, the radical cleric in Yemen. And the rest of us have been pretty much completely in the dark. So only relatively recently have we begun to have a public debate, for example, in Congress. And I'm sure you all remember the famous 13-hour filibuster by Rand Paul in the Senate early this year, that was sort of the bursting forth of all the pent-up concerns about drones. And since then, there have been a few hearings, and we're beginning to have the debate that, I think, as a reporter who advocates freedom of information, I would think we would have wanted to have some time ago. So, so why don't I leave it at that and turn it over to Tara.
Thank you. Can you guys hear me all right? Everybody? Okay, good. I'm going to talk about the role of media, because the media has an impact on the legal framework of drones and also on policies. A former United Nations official once told me that CNN shows the rockets taking off and Al Jazeera shows them landing. So however you look at the story of drones, the media is a part of it. The subject of drones and the legal framework is something that I care about a lot. I've been writing about this for about 3 years now, and I first got interested in it because of a legal argument. I'd come across a paper about drones that was written by Kenneth Anderson of American University. The paper was passed around widely in Washington, and maybe some of you know him or his work. In his paper, he looked at the subject of drones, and he also looked at their advantages. He said in his paper, if one intends to kill, the incentive is to do so from a standoff position because it removes potentially messy questions of surrender. I read that and I thought, is he kidding? And I found out that he was serious, and he was serious not in a brutal way, but in a matter-of-fact, legalistic way. I thought it seemed a bit cold, and so I decided to find out more about the program he was describing. At the time, Obama White House officials spoke about the program in general terms, but no one was allowed to talk about it. And there were other challenges to covering the story. Most of the strikes take place, they still do, in Pakistan in an area called the federally administered tribal area. Western journalists are banned from visiting that place unless they're accompanied by Pakistani military. As a result, most of the reporting that is done from that is done by the local journalists, and when they do these stories, they are doing them at tremendous risk, and some of them have been killed in the process. Here in the US, officials under the Bush administration were pretty open to journalists, and they let them come out to Creech Air Force Base in Nevada, which is where a lot of the operations are manned. But under the Obama administration, it became much more difficult for journalists. And they were pretty much, requests to visit Creech were pretty much postponed, sometimes indefinitely. And those of us who cover the drone program know that the biggest obstacle to our work comes not from Air Force officials, but from people in the White House. This is a pattern that goes back decades. During the Vietnam War, it was not the military that imposed restrictions. And this is from a book by Daniel Hallen called The Uncensored War. When there were restrictions, it was from the civilian leadership. But I wanted to write about the subject, so I did what I could. I went to Pakistan to see how the strikes affect people, but I did the interviews in Islamabad, not in Waziristan. Here in the US, I couldn't go to Creech, but I went to Syracuse, New York, and I saw the Reapers, and I manned the controls, whatever. And I'm proud of the work that I did. When I was doing my reporting, other reporters were working at the story too. Reporters of the New York Times were the most aggressive in their coverage of the drone program, both in terms of the quantity of the articles and also in the quality of the pieces that they were doing. I documented this in a paper that I wrote at Harvard last year. In 2009, the New York Times published 142 pieces about the drone program, while one of their biggest competitors, the Washington Post, published 72. As the years passed, journalists began to look at the subject in a more sophisticated manner, and the shift in coverage in the media was caused less by the passage of time than by important events in the evolution of the program. And these events included the killing of an American, Anwar al-Awlaki, in the fall of 2011, and also several months later, a speech by John Brennan. In his speech, he talked about moral questions regarding the drone program, and his speech also coincided at the time with the expansion of the program. These events caused a change in the coverage. At that point, journalists started to become more aggressive. They wrote more analytical pieces and more investigative stories. And they did this despite a reporting environment that was marked by secrecy and paranoia and by a crackdown on leaks. Certainly, Obama White House officials have reason to be cautious. Disclosing information about covert operations put American lives at risk and makes it more difficult to recruit assets. This is according to the Republican and Democratic leaders of the House and Senate Intelligence Committees. White House officials believe that secrecy is important to these kinds of operations. Back in 1999, when there were NATO strikes against the Serbian military, journalists tried to get information about the strikes, but officials refused to let them know. They said even though the Serbs knew, they didn't want to disclose that because it could help them understand what would happen next. Under the Obama administration, officials also believe that disclosing information about the drone strikes would be dangerous. They say that releasing information about how targets are selected would help the enemy. And the officials say that the people who choose the targets determine how much collateral damage could occur in order to make the strike possible. And if an insurgent leader had that kind of information, he could place himself among enough civilians to make the strike too costly. So they have prosecuted leaks. As you may have heard, under Obama, there has been at least 7 leak prosecutions, which is more than any other president before him. And as a result, the coverage of the drone program has been largely shaped by White House officials. If government officials were more forthcoming about the program, though, they would make it easier for people to determine its value and also to be able to make a decision about how they felt about the program itself. Georgetown Law's David Lubin wrote, he said, the most agonizing issue in the drone program is figuring out who is an enemy combatant, who is not, and how one knows. So much turns on the details, the expected collateral damage, how much care has been taken to identify the target, and whether the target was trying to surrender. And these are the things that people need to know in order to have an informed view about the program, in order to support it in good conscience. That's it.
Right. Well, first of all, I want to say I thought all 3 presentations were great and very informative, and I learned something. I appreciate that. The other thing I would do is I wanted to thank you guys. I live these issues every day. I always get very excited when people, particularly young professionals, are interested in these issues, because regardless of where you come down on them, this is what about keeping us safe and free and prosperous. And there's an obligation to do that with intelligence and judgment and prudence. So when I see people are interested in the issue, regardless of what angle they come at it from, it just makes me feel very good about the future. So I just really want to just thank you all for being here. Plus, I'm not used to talking to big audiences like this. More people than showed up at my first marriage, so I'm kind of jazzed. So I want to make 4 points really quickly. Kind of 2 about the present, which I actually think is boring and uninteresting, but and 2 about the future, which I think is very exciting and probably won't talk about. So the first thing I'll say is there's absolutely nothing really interesting. Not in the middle of law school, it's a terrible thing to say this, but legally there's absolutely nothing interesting about drones. A drone is a technology. It's a weapon. There's nothing more interesting about a drone than there is about an M16 or an aircraft carrier. There are no legal, moral, or ethical issues. There simply aren't. I defy anybody to suggest what the technology introduces that's new. And this technology absolutely fits totally cleanly and easily under the existing laws of land warfare, which derive from a just war tradition, which we've been working off of for centuries. It actually is pretty darn good. And the aspect of the tradition of the law of war, the philosophy of the law of war, the land warfare that's most applicable here is called proportionality. And so proportionality's got a couple of pieces to it. One is that you should only use military force, even in a conflict. You're still restricted. You should only use it appropriately. So you should only use it for a legitimate military objective. And the use of that force should be under the purview or the authority and control of a legitimate, competent military person to do that. So that requirement's the same for drones as it is for anything else. The other issue of proportionality, and the use of proportionality is supposed to be proportional. So for example, if there's a sniper in, if this was war zone and there was a sniper in the building across the street and it was full of you guys and I ordered an airstrike and blew up the entire building, that would be unproportional. Taking out an entire building, kill thousands of people just to get one sniper is not fair. That's an unproportional use of force. So the use of force should be proportional to the task. Doesn't mean you use the minimum amount of force, but it means that there's proportionality there that's commiserate with the mission. So for example, if I'm taking a city and it's a major strategic objective, I can use a heck of a lot more force. And I might level and destroy the city, but that's, not that it's okay, but but it's legitimate under the law of warfare because proportional to the tasks that I'm doing. The other issue is regard the killing or harming of innocents. And the law of land warfare and the just war tradition is very clear on this. It's not permissible to intentionally harm innocents in warfare, period. It's not. You cannot intentionally do that. Doesn't mean you can't kill civilians in war and it's perfectly okay. Not that it's perfectly okay, but there are times when we recognize that there are going to be civilians on the battlefield and those civilians may be injured or killed. And so what rules do you use that? Well, obviously you never intentionally kill civilians. And the other thing is you should use every measure that's reasonable and responsible to minimize the threat and the danger to civilians commensurate with the type of mission you're performing. You know, sometimes it's a pretty blunt instrument. So during World War II, for example, we did a thing called Operation Cobra, where it was a breakout of Normandy. And the only way we could break out is to literally carpet bomb the entire French countryside. Now, we knew in the process of that, we probably killed, and we actually don't know, but we estimate we probably killed thousands of French civilians. We probably killed more French civilians than we actually killed German troops. The French have never held us up for war crimes on that. The reason is, yeah, it was a blunt instrument, but it was actually the most accurate and precise instrument we had for the task. And we try to minimize that we could, but we recognize that civilians were going to be harmed in the process. So that concept of proportionality and the way it's operationalized on the field, the requirements are the same for drones as they are for any other thing. So the real core legal, moral, and ethical questions on the use of force regarding drones have really been long solved. The second point I make is what this debate is really about, and it's a perfectly legitimate debate to have. And it's largely about people wanting to rewrite the rules of land warfare and redefine what is an innocent and what's acceptable and what's not and who gets to make that call. That's a perfectly legitimate thing. So for example, there are people that really would like to define innocent as basically, unless a combatant is actively involved in the act of attacking the other side, you're an innocent and you shouldn't be targeted. Okay, that's not the definition. It's not the law. There are people that would like that to be the law. And actually, if you read the recent reports by Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, what they really are doing is redefining what they think the law should be. And that's their real indictment. And that's fine. But we should actually have an honest debate. If you want to change the rules of law and rewrite the Geneva Conventions, then say you're doing that. Don't run around saying that drones are unethical and unlawful and they violate every norm of war, because they don't. So if we had an honest debate about the law instead of lawfare, which is like clothing a policy debate as a faux legal argument, you know, we'd all get a lot further down on this issue. And I wish we would just be honest about that and talk about what we really want to debate about. So that's where we are. You know, you may find that exciting to talk about those things. I think they're terribly predictable and whatever. So I'd like to talk about very quickly about the future, which is in two areas. Is where is Obama's drone strategy going? And so I'm often in the ironic position in debates about absolutely defending the president's right to use drones and saying how incredibly stupid and idiotic I think it is in the same breath. Because I do. I think the drone strategy is stupid, and I think it's going to fail. And I have three big problems with it. The first is it misperceives the nature of the threat. Fundamentally, this is a global Islamist insurgent threat. What the administration has defined it as a network, and that if you kill certain nodes in the network, you degrade the network and it's not a problem. And they're wrong. You can't kill your way out of this problem, and killing select leaders is never going to do that. As a matter of fact, just as we've seen, the number of drone strikes has actually gone up. The actual spread of insurgent Al-Qaeda affiliates has increased. It hasn't increased, I would argue, because of the number of drone strikes. It's increased because we've been actually very ineffective at stopping the spread of Al-Qaeda. So the problem one is it's a weapon, and it's no more a strategy for winning the war against Al-Qaeda than the tank was a strategy for winning the war against Germany in World War II. We treat it as a strategy, and it's going to fail. The second thing is the enemy's getting unstupid. I don't know if anybody saw Zero Dark 30, but you notice there were several things that were accurate. The torture scene was not accurate, but one of the scenes that was accurate was where they said, hey, this big tall guy, he never comes out in the open. He's always walking in the trees. Well, that's because he's not stupid. He knows that there could be drones overhead or satellite imagery overhead, and he doesn't want to be seen. So you can go in an unclassified world, you can find a lot of literature and chatter about how do you defeat drones? How do you avoid drones? How do you combat this? And they're putting a lot of time and energy into this, and they're going to get smarter at it and better at it, and then we'll figure out what they're doing and we'll do something back and forth. But it's not an easy ticket, and it's actually going to get more and more difficult and complicated as time goes by. And the third thing look, the one thing people say, oh, well, you know what? At least it's not 100,000 boots on the ground, and it's kind of small and cheap and easy and whatever else. And I say that's a very, very dangerous belief. Actually, the thing that really scares me is I watch this administration become incredibly enamored with covert operations as the easy button that solves every national security problem is we had presidents do this before, most notably John F. Kennedy and Johnson. If you actually look at the outbreak of the Cold War, Eisenhower really set up the administration for covert operations, and they did some of that. Kennedy put that on steroids, and Johnson put it in overdrive. And the number of covert operations, there weren't drones obviously, but the number of kind of cheap, easy, pointed things like this that we did went through the roof. And where did we end up? We ended up in Vietnam. So the notion about how little cheap things are substitutes for problems sometimes isn't true. Sometimes it actually drags you into bigger things, and sometimes it so fails to deal with the problems that you wind up getting a bigger problem. So the notion is well, we're at least in non-invading countries. That may actually be very cold comfort in the future. And then the last point I point to is that where I think there actually are serious legal, moral, and ethical and strategic challenges, and that is in the future. So one was already mentioned, which is proliferation. There's going to be a lot of proliferation. A lot of people are going to have these, and they're going to kill people with them. And we're actually perversely aiding and abetting the speed of that. And where's my import-export expert? It's because what we're doing with import-export laws for drones is repeating the mistake that we made with satellites. After the Chinese stole some launch data, or actually we gave it to them mistakenly, we really cracked down on export of satellite technology to the point that everything on the satellite became ITAR, so it became restricted, including bolts and everything else. And so basically nobody could buy our satellites. And what that did was incentivize and create an industry around the world to compete with us. And so now, for example, the French are champion the fact that they can sell you an ITAR satellite that's every good as the United States. And the reality is nobody would have ever gotten the market except we took ourselves out of the market. And we're doing the exact same thing in drones. Because we have such tight export laws on drones, and the irony, ironically, is when we export military technology, we usually have pretty good controls over that, and people like to buy our stuff, and they usually abide by the rules that we give them to. But instead what we're doing is we're not going to sell anything to anybody, including the Italians, because I wouldn't trust the Italians, because my parents are Italian, and I know how that works out. So the Italians are probably going to go buy, drones from the Russians or the Chinese, and they're going to do whatever they want to please them without any restrictions whatsoever. So we're in the process of actually creating competitors in the drone business who are going to use these things, and they're not going to use near the controls that we would put over exports, nor are they going to be any squishy at all about who they sell them to. And then the last thing is the thing you really ought to worry about, which is autonomous warfare. Okay, the drone with the good major on thing is one thing. A drone that's Arnold Schwarzenegger out there doing its own thing, that's a whole nother kettle of fish. Who's responsible when that drone commits a war crime? We're not at broad span autonomous warfare yet because the technology is not quite there yet, but it's not that far down the road. If we had this conversation 10 or 15 years ago and we talked about drones today, and I'm sure people would say, oh, you know what, there's plenty of time to figure out that. And then before we knew it, we were doing drone strikes all over the world. So autonomous warfare is coming. The rules and the law of that and the strategy about that is very, very unclear. And that's something I would, if I were you guys, spend a lot of time worrying and caring about. I don't mind Arnold Schwarzenegger making bad movies, but I don't want him shooting at me. So.
I want to just pick up on some things that you said and ask the whole panel, but I'll start with you because you provoked this. I just read an article about kill lists. So it's claimed that the president is personally going through these lists and saying, oh yeah, this guy, yeah, get him. Oh yeah, this guy, yeah, this guy, this guy. So lists of individual named people who we are sending out drones to kill. This did not happen in World War II. This did not happen in World War I. This did not happen in any previous wars. And if you go back to the 18th century, Vattel's treatise says, well, of course, assassination, that's not war. You can't do that. So isn't that a change? And second question prompted by what you've been saying. You say, well, this is what war is. But when we just kind of kill some people in Yemen, that's not war. I mean, that looks more like assassination. It's really divorced from war. It's just like we go into Sudan and kill 2 people. So maybe that is presenting genuinely new issues, and whether you want to be lawyerly about it or just think about it in policy terms, maybe it is genuinely raising new issues which we need to think about and not just say, oh, well, the history of war is people get killed.
Well, let me answer the second issue first, which is it's operating under the rule of land warfare. That's an established law. You don't think it should be applied there? Fine. That's a debate. That's not new. That's a debate about whether you're applying the right kind of law and the law in the right place. That's the oldest debate in the world. So I don't find anything exciting or new about that. I'm perfectly comfortable with using the rule of law and land warfare in places like Yemen and the wilds of Pakistan. If you aren't, go to the Supreme Court, have a debate about it. The second point, that's not new either. We all had President Johnson famously picking out targets and screwing over Dien Bien Phu and
individual people.
But he was precise as the technology of the time would allow. And there were cases where Abraham Lincoln wanted to ride to the front and see things personally. So we've all had cases of presidents wanting to be the knight on horseback. Remember, in ancient warfare, the king would actually get out there and lead the charge. So the notion of the commander-in-chief being personally involved in warfare isn't new, quite honestly. Now, is it smart for this? Now, I know what the administration would say. The president would say that. Let me just finish my thought. The president would say is no. On the contrary, I am so concerned about this not being abused that I personally, the president of the United States, am personally involved in this to make sure that this power is not misused. That's what he would say. So here's the problem I have with that. First of all, to me, that's the notion that an ethical, moral, appropriate decision can only be made by the President of the United States and nobody else in the entire federal government, I think is kind of a wacky argument. Is that really the best use of the President's time? And it concerns me on 2 respects. Is he thinks that this is the center of gravity in winning the war on terrorism, and I think that's just wrong and stupid. And the third thing, and I think he's getting into the same problem that Johnson and Kennedy got into, is they're becoming enamored with the notion that somehow they're acting like Josiah Bartlett on West Wing, or Harrison Ford in Air Force One. And this is what I really worry about, is this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, is, we see these characters on TV, and then we expect our presidents to act like that. And our presidents actually start acting like that and believing that that's being presidential, about personally being involved in the process of fighting wars and killing. And I think it's distorting and wrong. And I find the policy, quite honestly, abhorrent.
Just to be clear, President Lincoln did not say, Robert E. Lee, he's the worst of all. Let's send in a sniper to take him down. But that is actually what President Obama is doing. He's saying, Aulaki, he's given really terrible
so we said go
take him down personally.
We shot down Admiral Yamamoto. That was an assassination. There's nothing wrong with targeted killings. What's wrong with targeted killings? Here's what the law says. If he's a legitimate target, you can kill him. If you kill him indiscriminately or if you kill him intentionally, the law doesn't care in war.
Can I say something?
Please.
Also, there were accounts about how the president chooses the targets, and that was what they said. But when they say that, it makes them sound really cool, right? Oh, Obama knows who should die, and he's really involved, and he's doing all this stuff. But if he really did it, he'd have to give up his day job or something. There's so many strikes, it doesn't seem possible that he's signing off on all of these things. I think also there's a certain PR element. It makes him sound really smart and in control, but I'm a little skeptical of it.
Well, we did some reporting on this last year, and what we were told at that time, this would have been the middle of 2012, was that he signed off on the riskier and more sort of higher profile, more important strikes in Pakistan, and that it had amounted to about 1/3 of them. And those are carried out, as you know, by the CIA. And then because he was the president who had expanded the targeted killing program to Yemen and on a very small scale to Somalia, he insisted on signing off on all strikes in those areas. And for the military process is a little bit more transparent than the CIA process. There are two different agencies doing this. There's the Joint Special Operations Command doing it in Yemen, and there is the CIA doing it in Pakistan and to a lesser degree in Yemen. And with the JSOC strikes, the military strikes, we were told that there's actually a fairly robust discussion that takes place, usually on secure video, involving dozens of people from a bunch of agencies, where they actually present, one of the agencies presents somebody and says, we would like to, add this person to the target list. And then, so for example, DOD can say, we want to put this guy on the target list, and the State Department can say, well, wait a minute, our intelligence suggests that he hasn't been active this year, can push back, and sometimes those names go on the list, sometimes they don't. I guess the other point to make in response to what Jim says is that we in the press write all the time about how Obama has dramatically increased drone strikes. And that's true. He dramatically increased them, and then he dramatically decreased them. So they've come way down in Pakistan, and CIA people will tell you, you can believe it or not, that it has really dismantled Al-Qaeda and its affiliates in the tribal region of Pakistan. And so they believe it's had a strategic effect, if you call that a strategic enemy. That's the reason the strikes have come down. In addition, it's hugely riled Pakistani political scene, and I think they're very careful, much more careful now about taking strikes. But they've even come down in Yemen. And just recently, you may have noticed there were 2 raids on the same weekend, one in Libya, one in Somalia, to try to capture people by American Special Operations forces. The one in Somalia backed off because of too much danger of civilian casualties. The one in Libya was successful. That suggested, the Obama administration has always said we'd prefer to capture, but there was no evidence to support that. They had killed several thousand people, and they'd only captured 1 by my count, and actually taken them into custody. That's changed a little bit. They've taken some more people into custody recently. And I do wonder whether this enthusiasm, initial enthusiasm for the drone, has maybe been tempered by their experience, and they're turning back to other ways of taking people off the battlefield.
Can I just respond to that real quickly? So that's actually Pakistan's actually a really good example, and it actually shows the failure of the Obama strategy. So, well, we got a lot of the Al-Qaeda in Pakistan, and it's really degraded their operational capability. And you know what? So what? Because all they did is they outsourced that to the Haqqani network. The Haqqani network is actually acting just as vociferously against our interests in Afghanistan as they were. So what's the big difference? I mean, it hasn't affected the ability of Al-Qaeda to push its agenda forward just because you killed a bunch of leaders.
I think they would disagree with that, because the Haqqani network has mainly been focused on the American troops in Afghanistan.
But that's our strategic interest.
No, but the original point of going after Al-Qaeda in Pakistan was attacks into the U.S. homeland.
Yeah, but they haven't had that capability for quite some time, and that capability was gone before Obama started ramping up his attacks.
Okay.
So there you go.
Let's people in the audience.
I was wondering what the panel thought the advantages and disadvantages of
If you wait just 1 second, they'll bring you a microphone, and then you'll be heard by everyone.
I was wondering what the advantages and disadvantages that the panel thought of moving the strikes from the CIA more to the military side. Should that be done more or less? How has things changed?
Well, the theory would be that they'd be more transparent, right?
Has that been successful, or has it been?
I mean, I'm skeptical that it will be transferred over to the military, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think the theory behind it is that the military is, generally speaking, in history, the part of the government that kills people, and the CIA is, collects intelligence, and it was, because Pakistani authorities insisted on deniability, that CIA began the drone program in Pakistan. And Obama, you may remember in a big speech in May, suggested that they were going to be much more transparent about these strikes and this program, and that it would gradually be transferred from the CIA to the military. I think it's fair to say neither of those things has happened. And I also say as a reporter, it's very difficult to get information on strikes by the CIA or by JSOC. But at least for a while, it was actually easier to get information about CIA strikes than it was about JSOC strikes. So it doesn't necessarily follow that.
Tell them what is JSOC.
JSOC is the Joint Special Operations Command, the branch of the military that does the strikes.
Yeah, I read the same newspapers you do, and where the current reporting is that the administration's decided they're not going to do that. It looks like they're just going to keep both. In part, I think because probably the future right now for the preponderance of drone strikes is in Yemen. That's probably going to be done by JSOC. The really interesting one is the one they just did where they took out the Mossad in Pakistan, right? That really created interesting issues for the Pakistanis, because what the Pakistanis had planned to do is, as the new civilian government recognizes that they can't tolerate what they're getting from the Pakistani Taliban, and they wanted to crack down. But the military didn't want to be on the hook for it, and the civilian government didn't really want to be on the hook for it either. And so the plan is they had at least this is what they claim, is we wanted to go out and negotiate, and then once the negotiations failed, then we could say, well, we tried, and then the civilian administration could order the military to go into the tribal areas and take these guys down a notch. That was the plan. And now the problem is because we went and killed, one of the heads of the Pakistani Taliban. The Pakistani Taliban complained, oh, the United States has destroyed the peace process. So in other words, the government and the military can't blame it on the Pakistani Taliban. So it's an interesting question, like, why did we do that? But I think the reality is that drone strikes in Pakistan are going to be on the decline because it's getting too hard. There's not enough Al-Qaeda to kill anymore. Going after the Haqqani network creates real issues. You can't really disaggregate all these different groups because the truth is they're all interlocked. And to say, well, we can go after these bad guys, but those bad guys doesn't work. And this sounds terrible, but we've run out of easy guys to kill. Everybody we kill now in Pakistan would just make things really messy and complicated. So it's not hard to find bad people. It's hard to find bad people that you can kill without annoying a lot of other people. And as you're trying to run away from Afghanistan, you're trying not to make anybody mad.
Hi, I'm Shun Murray. I'm from American University. So as I understand it, the legal authority to do targeted killing comes from the 2001 authorization for the use of military force. And it's written in such a way that it's supposed to target people that have a nexus with 9/11, which over time, logically, is going to be stretched. And I understand that there's a new terminology of associated forces and close belligerents. My question to you is, what do you think of the politics going forward? Do you think that the 2001 AUMF will be revised, or could it be repealed, or do you think that it's likely that it'll just continue?
Well, the reality is we're all going to pretend, right? It's increasingly not credible that the AUMF is an open-ended invitation to kill any bad guy forever. Increasingly, that's kind of what we're drifting to under this. So the administration continues to pretend that they have all the authority they need and it's all relevant. And Congress pretends that's okay because nobody really wants to open the AUMF because they're afraid what's going to come out at the other end. So we're at a bit of a stalemate on the AUMF. And so right now, I think the Congress and the president will just kind of, oh God, I got to say it. They'll just drone on.
Yeah, I don't see any movement to change it, but what I think happens is that the definition of what's Al-Qaeda gets expanded. So there's all kinds of allied groups that are Al-Qaeda that, you know, the relationship is a little bit nebulous.
I just want to remind you that President Clinton was already launching drone strikes without the AUMF, so I'm not sure that everything hangs on that.
Right. That's true. Yeah, I was just going to say that the other legal rationale and some of the Obama administration's speeches explaining their target killing policy, they've talked about, if you like it, we got the AUMF. If you don't like the AUMF,
That's right.
we have self-defense. You know, an international law, right to self-defense if there's an imminent threat. And then they have presented a kind of novel definition of imminence related to terrorism, which is that usually you think of an imminent threat being the guy's holding the gun and pointing it, but they would argue that if you have somebody like bin Laden or somebody like al-Awlaki, they have made it clear that they're plotting to kill Americans all the time, and the next chance they get, they'll kill more Americans, so that there's this sort of stretched out notion that the threat from them is imminent all the time, and if we get a limited window to kill them, then it's legal to kill them. You guys are the lawyers, so you can sort that one out.
This gentleman here in the front line.
Sir, my name is Umar. I am from Pakistan. My question to the panel and to the madam particularly is, there are two major concerns of the people of Pakistan. One is the sovereignty of Pakistan. I mean, in case of drones, is it not equal to the boots on the ground of, territory of Pakistan? And the second concern is the collateral damage. Because most of our public leaders, I would say, and opposition leaders, they suppose or they think that because of these drone attacks and collateral damage, the new suiciders are coming. A new breed of suiciders is arising in this country. What do you comment, sir?
Just being very blunt, Pakistan's problem is a seriously declining security situation, which is a result of the proliferation of these groups in there. Now, I agree with you that the U.S. actions aren't slowing that. We could debate about whether it's contributed or not, but a lot of this is because of poor Pakistani government and military policies that have created the situation to let these people thrive, and these people are now turning on them. So Pakistan is a wonderful country full of amazing people, but nobody wants to invest there, and nobody wants to go there because it's becoming a more violent and difficult place to live. And obviously, sadly, the real loser here is quite honestly, the Pakistani people.
Could I just supplement the question if other people want to address this? What the administration keeps saying is, well, we're doing this with the consent of the Pakistani government, so there's not a sovereignty problem. It was a consent given privately, but it was given. And I wonder whether that is a reasonable stance. That, a government which can't publicly acknowledge that it has agreed to this, seems to me, has not quite agreed to it.
And to answer your question, I think that the number of civilian casualties is it's at the heart of the issue over drones, is how you determine who is a civilian casualty, how you come up with the numbers, and how you compensate the families. That's really one of the biggest problems.
I think one other thing about drones is, there was a recent study that estimated somewhere around 500,000 people have died in Iraq since the U.S. invasion. The estimate in Pakistan from drone strikes is maybe 3,000, something like that. So the scale of the killing in a big war is obviously many, many, many times, 1,000 times greater than with drone strikes. But drone strikes, because of their very precision and small scale, often lead to very personalized accounts, especially of the mistakes. So if you see, the coffins of 3 kids from an American strike, that has an enormous political and emotional impact. And I think the backlash against the Obama administration, both in Pakistan and Yemen, has been much greater than maybe they anticipated, because they were just focused on the numbers.
You had another question.
Hello. So I apologize to kind of take us away from the Pakistan-Yemen example, but I wanted to ask, specifically when we start to get into more perhaps humanitarian interventions. Predators were used in Libya to conduct strikes, but also to call in airstrikes off of manned platforms. And the UN mission in Congo has started utilizing drones for surveillance purposes, but one wouldn't imagine it being beyond the scope of reality that they would also use those to actually, as a method of force. So what are some of the, I guess, over the horizon, the future aspects, as you mentioned, uses of drones, and in some ways the positive on the humanitarian end, humanitarian intervention end, but also what that could mean in a negative sense of what we've learned so far?
Yeah. So actually, I'm really glad you raised that point, because one of the sad things about drones is when you say the word drone, the major kind of throwing his head down and shaking his head, we all think of predators and reapers with Hellfire missiles, or we even think more limited just in terms of military capabilities. The reality is, this technology, family of technologies, is actually a great gift to mankind. So for example, some of the most cutting edge work on global warming has been done by drones, because a lot of it has to do with surface temperatures on the seas. You have to fire over big expanses of water that are very empty. It's a very dull, stupid job, and drones are perfect for that. We use drones for forest fire. So there's a lot. We're gonna look. The reality is we're going to be using unpiloted a lot of everything. I mean, the Google car is just the wave of the future. So the notion of not having a person in the seat kind of thing, using that for all kinds of ubiquitous things. We use it for crop dusters right now. And so one of the interesting things is that, Yamaha's got a great UAV crop duster. It's awesome. I can take that same crop duster and I could put a biological weapon on it and spray it over a city. Every good technology has got good and bad uses. And I respected Senator Paul's. Well, not really. He's a friend, so I can be honest. I thought it was the whole stand up for 13-hour thing was kind of silly, but the reality is, and I thought the government was silly. I mean, do we really need to do drone strikes on American soil? Is that the only way we can use deadly force in the United States? So I would have just said, yeah, of course it's stupid. I was a president, would just sign a thing that says it's ridiculous. We're never going to do that. But we didn't do that. It was dumb. But he fixated on kind of a thing which, in many ways, kind of poisoned the whole debate. There's lots of uses for these technologies, and so we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. On the other hand, I totally respect the rights of state and local governments. I mean, I don't want to live in a surveillance society either. So, what's the difference between a cop and a helicopter with a sensor and a camera and a UAV? Well, the answer is legally nothing. But on the other hand, I'm not real excited about that. And I wouldn't want, necessarily a drone running around my neighborhood. So if cities and states want to limit the use of that for law enforcement things, God bless it. But there's a commercial side to this debate. There's a scientific research side to this debate. There's a humanitarian side. There's a disaster response side, where there's enormously uses for these technologies, and we're going to be using them a lot for that.
So you had a question back there. Oh, wait, let me get this guy, and then you're next.
Hello, my name is Stuart Jenkins, and I'm an intern for the United States Senate. And my question goes to Mr. Shane. You wrote an article last year entitled The Moral Case for Drones. And in it, you basically laid out the whole framework of how they're more precise, they're more effective at reducing civilian casualties, limiting that, being more proportional in the response, as you pointed out. However, there was a rebuttal to your piece a few days later, which you may or may not have read. I'm not sure. But it took issue with the point that, because even in your previous article that you wrote, in the one about the secret kill list, of how President Obama embraced the method of the signature strike, which is where all military-age males in a certain area are considered terrorists or threats. And so when he embraced that method, nowhere in your article, as Jeremy Hammond, the reporter, responded to your piece, pointed out that you do not kind of raise that point in your article. And I was wondering if you still believe that the moral case for drones exists in light of the approach to counting civilian casualties.
Well, I was actually characterizing the moral case. I wasn't really trying to make the moral case for drones. I was characterizing those and quoting those who make that case. But there is an obvious difference in the scale of killing involved here, and there is at least the opportunity, the technological possibility. If you compare, a fighter flying over and dropping something on a village versus a drone loitering for a whole day, and operators back in Nevada at their leisure studying the people, comparing it with other kinds of intelligence. There's an obvious advantage that can be a humanitarian advantage in the sense that you might kill the people you actually want to kill, and you might be able to limit the collateral damage. In practice, of course, that's very difficult. There was a case we wrote about in Yemen, for example, which was, in brief, a cleric gave an anti-Al-Qaeda sermon, and a couple of Al-Qaeda guys said, "We want to meet with you and talk about this." And he was a little nervous, but he knew the family of one of these guys, so he said, "Okay, I'll meet you." And he brought his cousin, the policeman, for protection. And they all met, and a drone strike killed them all. So that was, a PR disaster from the U.S., from the point of view of the U.S., because here's a police officer and an anti-Al-Qaeda cleric who've been killed in this indiscriminate killing. But from the operator's standpoint, I assume, what they knew was two identified members of Al-Qaeda were meeting with two guys. It must be an Al-Qaeda meeting. We'll take the shot. It just shows how difficult it is, even with the drone. I was just, I think that the people who defend the drone are comparing it with, traditional airstrikes, and there's a huge advantage. It doesn't mean that they're always perfect. And as you say, in the area of signature strikes, I should just say briefly, a personality strike is what they call, here's a named terrorist who we really think is a bad guy. We're going to go out and find him and kill him. A signature strike is something that's developed in Pakistan, mostly for bands of guys who look like they were headed for the Afghan border, were going to come fight in the war. And the signature was a bunch of guys with weapons in a certain area, sometimes headed in a certain direction. Those were by far the most controversial area of strikes. And the rule of thumb for at least when we were doing our reporting last year was that in these situations, if you kill a military-age male, the assumption, your presumption is that he was an enemy combatant unless you have intelligence indicating otherwise. It doesn't mean they're going in the middle of Islamabad and killing people at random and saying, well, he's a military-age male, so he must be a terrorist. It's not like that, but it is true they don't know the names and identities of the people they're killing.
So there was a question back here.
My name is Tanveer, and I'm a graduate from George Washington University in international law. Well, just a jest, I can foresee like drones doing like pizza deliveries in future. Well, my assessment is like we have in the United States, at least we the lawyers have established this, that the drone strikes are legal. When we are in armed conflict, we talk about prosecutory tactic, we talk about Israel Supreme Court's decision, then we talk about Hamdan v. Rumsfeld. Then even if we don't have authorization of military force, then we have Article 51 to defend. We have negated this idea of having drone courts, which is not a practical thing. Shouldn't we think of like improving our oversight in terms of IGs, like Inspector Generals, in what we have in administration itself for different departments, like Homeland Security? It has IGs for different things. And how about having some kind of robust IG system, like in a new regime, so we can have at least something where we can see something of oversight?
Sounds like a great idea.
Well, except all those agencies do have IGs.
But there are like, I don't think it's like effective in this regime, because given to the fact like we already deny we don't give disclose information and all that about
well,
it.
That's not the job of an IG though. I mean, an Inspector General, particularly if you have one that's under statute, they report to two people. They report to the Congress and they report to the head of their administration. It's not their job or their obligation necessarily to make information transparent to the American people. Sometimes they do, but that's not their primary mission. How they provide oversight is they report back to the responsible and oversight officials. That's their job. Their job is not to be an external investigator and to provide transparency.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, if sometimes like there is a collateral damage, like the Pakistani friend said, like it's not proportionate before, like, clearly. Then some guy who was involved, he should be prosecuted for that. Like, what I mean to say.
Yeah, part of the problem is that there has been so little transparency that there is a huge range of estimates of the number of non-combatants, of civilians who've been killed by drone strikes, ranging from the sort of dozens to the hundreds. And you know, depending on whether you go, for example, to the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, which has an elaborate website, a London investigative journalism group that has tried to do a count, or if you accept the low-end estimates, the Pakistani government just put out a very low estimate of civilian casualties, and it's very hard as a, you know, as an outsider to make up your, you know, to kind of get to the truth on this. I just mentioned that the Senate Intelligence Committee just approved an intelligence authorization bill that would actually require once a year the administration would have to reveal the number of combatants and the number of non-combatants that it believed it had killed the previous year. We'll see if that passes.
You know, I have to say, this is one of my concerns about covert operations in general, and where we ought to learn lessons from previous administrations. As a political leader, they're seductive in the sense, because look, the reality is it's a covert operation. We can't give you transparency. I mean, all the arguments about, you know, defies operational security and everything, those are all valid points. Now, it just happens to be convenient that when we totally screw up royally, we can also bury it and nobody knows about it. So particularly for a politician who's very sensitive about their how they're interpreted and what their views are and everything else, this is very seductive. It was very seductive for Johnson. It was very seductive for Kennedy. If you do covert things and you screw it up, the virtue is nobody will ever know about it. You know, if it works, you can leak it and be a hero, right? So I think when you start to make covert operations a central tenet of your strategy for how you're going to keep the nation safe, I think you really, really have to think long and hard about that, because you can wind up going in some pretty wacky things. And once you get seduced to the thing of, well, I can do this because nobody finds out about this stuff, then it's just oh, let's just do more of that, you know.
You mentioned a while ago that we did bombing in Normandy before the breakout at Saint-Lô, and we didn't just kill French people, we killed some Americans, including General Leslie McNair.
Yeah, we killed about 20.
And then we named a fort after him. But the military makes mistakes, and it's not clear that an inspector general is the vehicle for, you know, holding them to account. You don't have omniscience as a military commander. You make mistakes. What do you want to do about that? I don't know, but I think you don't want to treat that like embezzling funds, which is a lot of what Inspector General do.
Okay, it's interesting. There actually was an Inspector General investigation of the bombing in Operation Cobra.
Well,
yeah,
it was embarrassing to kill Americans.
Yeah.
So there was one. Last question there.
Hello. In the discussion tonight, there's been some talk about the loss of civilian life, and there was also mention about how the U.S. is now apparently turning to snatches by the U.S. Special Forces as a possible alternative to the use of drones. My question is relating to the laws of armed conflict. We talked about proportionality tonight, but I'm wondering if the loss of civilian life and the fact that these snatches by the U.S. Special Forces, the fact that they're succeeding, whether these have some kind of legal implications for the other laws of armed conflict, distinction and necessity. I mean, is it necessary to use drones if the snatches seem to be working? And also, what implication for necessity and distinction does the loss of civilian life? I mean, what are the legal implications of that? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, you know, I would just say from a practical standpoint on a global scale, it's very unlikely that going in and snatching somebody is going to replace drone strikes, because the amount of manpower, because you're putting lives at risk, and you're also likely to get really embarrassed, because not only do you not want to lose people, but you also don't want to see them in the other guy's prison, with a camera, confessing to being a war criminal. So because of the amount of prep work that goes into that and everything else to pull that off, and then you've got a live human being that you have to deal with, and you have to figure out, where am I going to keep him, what am I going to try him, what am I going to charge him with, which country I'm in. Those are going to be, I think, unless you really want to get in trouble, those are going to be relatively few, and they're an important capability, but they're never going to be a substitute for. They're never going to be. We'll just stop doing those, because they're designed for different purposes.
I think one way in which the drone has changed things fairly radically is apparent if you think about the case of Anwar al-Awlaki, this Yemeni American cleric who was killed in September of 2011 in Yemen. One of the criteria, legal criteria for killing him, was the infeasibility of capture. That was one of the things that they described in this still secret Office of Legal Counsel memorandum that justified the strike. Because why can you deprive an American of his life without due process and so on? A lot of legal questions there, and so infeasibility. It was they had to prove, or prove to their own satisfaction that it was infeasible to catch him. Well, obviously it wasn't infeasible. That's a subjective notion. You could have sent a couple hundred special operations folks, and you probably could have caught him. He was out in the desert with a number of gunmen. But once you have the drone as a demonstrated technology, let's say they sent the SEALs to get Awlaki. There was a gunfight, predictably there would have been a big gunfight in the desert, right? Let's say a couple of American troops were killed. How are you going, as President of the United States, how are you going to say, and perhaps Awlaki would get killed too, it's a gunfight. So how are you going to explain yourself why you did this, as opposed to sending a drone, risking no American lives, and just taking a shot? Once you have that technology, I think those trade-offs are politically very different.
Okay, so.
Do I need a mic?
All right, you are the very last.
All right. I think you just hit on the whole subject. The difference between the human and the machine interface versus the human interface in the warfare. You just hit on it. If we use a drone, we don't have to have the human. If we use a drone, it's very seductive. We don't have to kill any of our people. We don't have to go to war. But then you say the reason is it's okay to use a drone to go into Yemen because we might not be able to capture them. What's wrong with then saying, well, let's just use a drone on one of our mafia guys because it's sort of hard to get to them. Why didn't we start using drones, 20 years ago in New York? So is the legal process, because it's becoming more difficult, we don't do it anymore? Is that the excuse? So to me, what about sovereignty, national sovereignty? What about, are we really pushing the envelope legally? And your point about the IG, I was an IG. Economy and efficiency of the force. It's our job to make sure it's doing the right thing. If you don't agree with the IG, that's fine. Find some other way to make it not so seductive. Keep people working hard to take these people to court. Whether it's the World Court, whether it's Den Haag, whatever it is. But if we slide down that slippery slope, I think we're in trouble.
Well, I guarantee you we're not going to slide down the slippery slope, because this is the promise that we've made throughout history. Armor, the tank, everything was going to make warfare easier and more simple and more seductive, right? And the reality is, in the end, they never do. It's like advertising, right? So this is just the latest version of that. I hear that all the time is, oh God, we'll have, warfare will become, because humans aren't involved, it's dehumanizing, and therefore we like war better. Look, that's not going to happen. War is going to be an ugly, terrible, horrible thing. And, and there may be people who are actually stupid enough to think, oh, I have a magic button now that makes war kind of a nice thing. but it's never going to happen. It never has in the past. I doubt it ever will, because, and this is, I think, the most important point at all. Look, the question about the moral case for a drone. That's a stupid question. Drones aren't moral, immoral. They don't even have a soul. It's a technology, right? These are technologies. It's just another form of technologies. When you allow people to take that technology and give it some kind of seductive notion that somehow it has a will or a purpose or morality all its own in using it, then you have transformed the debate into something that it's not, right? You've gone into a place of magic land, where all of a sudden now this thing is the problem. The thing is never the problem. We build them, we use them, we're the problem. It's always going to be that way in warfare. Stop blaming the stupid little electron. If you don't like what's going on, blame the major.
And we can continue this conversation outside. We have a reception waiting for everyone, but please, everyone, join me in thanking our panelists and our moderator. On behalf of the Federalist Society, the Military Law Society, and the National Security Law Journal, thank you, everyone, for joining us.